Great, thank you very much. So I'm Sarah Armand Bushell. I'm a registered dietitian and children's nutritionist, and I specialise in babies and toddlers, so the really early years. I've been qualified for 21 years this year. So I've been around a bit, and I've weaned 2 babies of my own, which I think is always really important, so I can understand things from a mum point of view as well as being a professional as well. And today I am going to talk to you about just how to start weaning. So for those of you who are thinking that your baby might be nearly ready, or you're heading towards that 6-month mark, and you just want to know how to get started, I'm going to go through that. So if it's all right with you, I've prepared some slides. I'm going to share my screen with you, but you don't have to take notes. I've actually produced a big booklet for you, which is it's 24 pages, actually, 24-page long booklet, which covers everything that I'm going to talk about today, because I know how hard it is to take notes, follow along when you've got a baby who's crying and you're trying to do all sorts of different things. So to get a hold of that, head over to my website and you'll see a Weaning Week banner there, and you literally just click on there, put your email address in, and it'll come direct to your inbox. So my website is childrensnutrition.co.uk/welcome. Okay, so I'll pop that in the chat as well, so you can write that down. You can head over there. Right, I'll share my screen with you. Bear with me a second. Okay, so can everyone see that? Brilliant. Okay, I'm just going to minimize the video bit so that I can see what I've written down. Brilliant. Okay, so actually I'm going to go back to the start because this has skipped forward a little bit. So how to introduce a first meal, that's what we're talking about. Sometimes called stage 1. Sometimes it's not called that anymore, it's just how to get started, but it's all about how to basically get going. I've already talked a little bit about me, so that's my website there at the bottom, and if you just do /welcome on the end, you'll get to that page where you can download that free guide for you. So let's kick off with, what age should your baby be? So we've all heard the 6-month thing. It's been around now quite a few years. So in the past, it's been various different ages, but now we know it's around 6 months. But actually, I think what people don't recognize is the key is the word around. And around is critical because all babies develop differently. And the 6th month is just kind of the average age that most babies get to that developmental stage where they're ready to start eating solid food. And so actually what you really need to do is look for whether they're developmentally ready. So here we go. How do you assess for developmental readiness? So there's 3 signs to look out for. There is the absence of the tongue thrust reflex. There's having a steady base, so can sit up well, hold their head steady. And the third one is to have good hand-eye coordination. So what does that actually mean? So the first one, the absence of the tongue thrust reflex. This is where, when you go to put something towards your baby's mouth, like a weaning spoon or a toy or anything, your clean finger would do the same job. If they stick their tongue out, that means they're not developmentally ready. If their tongue goes back in and lets you put your weaning spoon or your little finger or whatever it is, let you put that in their mouths, then the tongue thrust reflex has gone. So that's one thing that you could do now. Actually, you could check that with your baby now and see whether that's still there or not. The second one, the steady base, that is all about, can they hold themselves steady? And the reason why this is important is because when babies are learning how to manage solid foods in their mouths, they need to focus 100% of their attention on doing that. And if they're having to also hold themselves steady and focus a bit of attention there, they're not going to be able to give the eating part the full attention that it deserves. So we want to make sure that they are able to do that. And a quick check that you can do at home is just plonk your baby in a sitting position on the floor with some cushions around and let go. If they can hold themselves for 2 to 3 seconds, that's good enough for me, and that means that they are ready. Because obviously you're going to be putting them in a high chair anyway, so they're going to have that support. So you're really just making sure that they're not just wobbling over, that they can sit there for a couple of seconds. And when you do go to put them in their high chair, and if they are a bit big for it, you can always stuff a few rolled up tea towels or something down the sides of it so that they're nice and secure in there. And then the third one is having good hand-eye coordination. And that's really just so that they can bring food up to their mouths to start to explore. And the reason why that's important is because even if you're going down the traditional weaning route with purees and you're going to be spoon feeding, by about 6.5 months, you'd be introducing finger foods anyway. So you're only really going to be doing the spoon feeding bit for a couple of weeks at most. And so actually we want to make sure that babies can get their hands stuck in, can explore foods, can really enjoy feeling the foods on their hands, whether that be a puree or whether that be a stick of broccoli. They need to be able to do that. And if they can bring it up towards their mouths, then that's great as well. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So what happens if you give the solids too early? You can probably imagine, actually. So if you're presenting a spoon of something or finger food and the tongue thrust reflex is there, your baby's just going to push it straight back out. So you might get a little bit in, but most of it's going to come back out. So they're just not going to eat it, basically. But what also sometimes happens is that they can get really frustrated, they can get really upset, they can cry, they can show you that they're really unhappy with what's happening. And we don't really want that to happen, because if you persevere like that, then they can develop a, excuse me, a bit of an aversion to the whole mealtime, the food, the eating environment, and it's not something that we want. We want it to be really pleasant and nice and enjoyable for them. So if that happens, don't worry, just recognize they're not quite ready and come back in a couple of weeks' time. That's fine. Okay. So if you do get to 6 months and you've done those 3 checks and your baby isn't developmentally ready, you might be thinking, well, what shall I do? Because my baby's 6 months now. And actually this isn't talked about very much, but I think it's really important for you to be aware of. So there is actually a 4th sign of readiness for weaning, and it's a bit of a nutritional one. So you might have heard people say that by 6 months, babies' nutrition stores have run out. And what we mean by that is that they're born with a really good store of iron in particular, but other nutrients as well. And iron is needed for brain growth. It's linked to all sorts of things, so it can even affect their intellect when they're older. So they're born with this store, and they use that store during that first 6 months of life, and then they get to 6 months and it's more or less gone. And so often we say to people that if you get to 6 months and they're not developmentally ready, you've actually still got to introduce solid foods anyway, because they need those, what we call critical nutrients. They actually need them for their growth and development. And so I would advise you to still start if you got to that stage. And what we do know is that if you start introducing a spoon and the tongue thrust reflex is there, the introduction of the spoon can actually help push that tongue thrust back. And we often see that in premature babies. So it's okay to do that. It's something that seems to just improve as they practice and as time goes on. Okay, right, moving on. What baby weaning equipment do you need? So don't be fooled, you don't need loads of expensive equipment. I know there's tons and tons of websites and magazines and all sorts out there, but actually you don't need loads of stuff. Excuse me, it's going to have a drink. What you do need is a high chair. Ideally with a tray, but if not, a high chair that can come up to a table, so the table can be your tray. You need a bib. There's all sorts of different bibs out there, but really that's just to protect clothes. If you're not bothered about clothes, you don't need a bib, don't worry about that. Things like a soft weaning spoon if you're going to be doing spoon feeding, and actually if you're going to be doing baby led weaning, you're still going to need a weaning spoon, because you're going to want to introduce things like yogurts, which you can't really eat with your hands. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a weaning spoon that I quite like, and what I like about this is the fact that it's really soft. So it's not metal. It's not going to be uncomfortable in your baby's mouth.
If you could show us that when we're out of screen share, Sarah, that'd be hugely useful. If we could just
yes, I will.
We're looking at the screen at the moment, so if you could just show us that bit, super.
Shall I come out of screen share and do that now?
If you want to, it's entirely up to you.
Yeah, why not? There we go, brilliant. So this is a soft weaning spoon. So it's this nice sort of really soft rubbery texture. So it's warm. A metal spoon's really quite cold and quite uncomfortable. So these are what you want to go for. And at the same time, it's really shallow. You probably can't see very well on the screen, but it means that your baby doesn't have to work very hard to get the food out, because it's quite a shallow spoon. It's easy for them to get that. And you can see how flexible it is as well. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. While we're out of screen share, I'll talk about cups as well, because you're also going to be wanting to introduce a cup for water. And to be totally honest with you, the best cup is an open cup. So I know there's all sorts of different cups out there with different spouts and teats and non-spill and all sorts of things. But in terms of their development, what we're trying to get babies to do is to learn how to drink from an open cup, like you or I would eventually. And so something like these tiny little, almost like shot glasses, are great. So this holds about 50 mils, so it's really small. And because the opening is much smaller than, my cup, it fits really nicely around a little mouth. So they're ideal, these little baby cups, and they're really soft as well. Other cups that are quite good if you really can't bear the mess and you think, oh my God, it's going to spill and just be disastrous. The other cups that I quite like are these sort of spouted cups. So you've got a spout here, that sort of flips up and down. What's nice about this is you've got two handles, so really easy for babies to learn how to pick up and tip towards them to drink. The other thing is, as well, is there's no valve in there, so if you tipped it up and did that, water would flow out. So that's a good test to see whether it is a free flow cup. There's lots of very similar cups out there, but they've actually got valves built into them, and we don't really want those because it's a really unnatural sucking action, and actually what you end up doing is teaching them to do something that they wouldn't naturally do, and then you have to unteach them that so that they can learn to drink out of something open when they're a bit older. So just forget the valved ones. Okay, I'm just gonna go back to my screen share and on to the next slide. Okay, what foods should you start with? Okay, so there's a little bit of research, not a huge amount, but there's a little bit of research that's found that babies who are introduced to vegetables first are more likely to be eating vegetables when those babies grow into being children. And the key to this appears to giving them very early on, so first foods, and repeating those vegetables so quite frequently, so that your baby gets used to the flavour and is able to identify what each one is. So what we recommend is for the first week or two to introduce vegetables singly before you then start combining them to make new dishes, so that they learn broccoli is broccoli, cauliflower is cauliflower, that kind of thing. And actually, because babies are born with very, very mature sweet taste buds, they are going to accept sweet foods much more easily. So if we start with bitter things, they've not had the sweet stuff yet, and they're more likely to be able to accept them and progress. So when I say bitter vegetables, I'm talking about things like avocado, that's a great one, potato, aubergine, spinach, asparagus, green beans, and then things like cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, even things like Brussels sprouts and leeks are actually really good. These are all sort of bitter vegetables that you want to get them used to first. And then after they've had a good range of bitter vegetables, they can then start moving on to the sweeter veggies, so things like carrot and butternut squash and sweet potato, peas, sweet corn, that kind of thing. And that will just help get their palate, I guess, set up for success. Okay, how are we doing for time? 10 to. This time goes so quickly, doesn't it? What time of day should it be? So a great way to think about this is to think about what your baby usually does in a day. So when they're coming up to weaning age, they'll have a period of time where they feed, they'll have a period of time when they sleep, and they'll have a period of time when they play. And it often goes in that sort of cycle leading up to 6 months. You want to be introducing your first tastes in that play part. And this is because babies learn to eat through play. So when they're playing, they're not hungry because they've had their feed, they're not tired because they've had their sleep, they're alert, they're really ready to accept new things. So that's the ideal time to be introducing the food. And in terms of when, early in the day is better. We know that babies can have allergies to things, and so I like to advise people to introduce foods earlier in the day, because then you've got the whole day ahead of you to observe them and see whether there is any adverse reactions that come about. Where should your baby sit? Okay, so this is really, really important, and it goes back to that readiness sign of having a stable base. So they need to be in a really, really well supported high chair. And what that means is having support around their middle and behind their knees, and critically on their feet. They need to not have little legs dangling, so they need something for their feet to press against. There's loads and loads of high chairs out there that have that bit missing, and if you have got one of those, you just need to compromise. So what I would say is stack up a pile of boxes or books or something like that, so they've got a footrest, or you can even wrap a towel around the high chair legs and tie it at the back, so they've got something to press against. So a footrest is really, really important. I'd avoid things like bumbo seats and like seating pods, because what that actually makes your baby do is it kind of makes their bottom go backwards and it pushes them forwards, and that's a really uncomfortable position for swallowing and for food to go down. So avoid those sort of seating pods that you see. And where should you sit? Well, actually directly opposite your baby. When they're starting to wean, they really need reassurance from you that everything is going fine. So sitting in front of them, making eye contact, having a really smiley, happy face is really important as well. Should daddy be there too? Absolutely. It's a momentous occasion. So yeah, definitely don't miss out on that, and have your camera on standby, because there'll be some crazy faces that you want to record forevermore. Okay, your role as the parent when you're introducing that first few meals is to make it as reassuring and positive as you possibly can, because this is the first time they've ever had anything other than milk. And actually you might find that they're really shocked and horrified and, oh my goodness, what is this that's been put in my mouth? And they become a little bit anxious and worried. So it's really key for you to be sat in front of them. This is the reason why you're sitting in front of them, and to have that really happy, smiley face, and you're using a high sort of sing-songy voice to say, wow, this is fun, this is really great, because you're really encouraging your little one to understand that food is a positive experience. And when you do spoon feeding, and this is one of the reasons why I want you to get that this download, is there's a few steps that can make this really successful. So number one, sitting opposite it and having good eye contact and having a really happy smiley face. But then what you probably want to do, if you're doing spoon feeding, traditional feeding, is you want to plop a dollop of that vegetable puree on the tray in front of them, or your tabletop, wherever they are, and then tell them in your really excited, singy-songy, happy voice what they're having, and then show them the spoon. And then, and hopefully they'll go and explore it straight away, and they'll get their hands in and they'll get stuck in, and this is great because it's all about the sensory experience. So that is fantastic. You want them to do that. Then what you will do is you're going to dip the tip of your soft baby weaning spoon into that puree and just get a little trace of it on the edge of your spoon. And then in one swift movement, not tentatively, just move that spoon up towards their mouth and put that little trace of puree that you've got on the spoon onto the bottom lip, and then withdraw the spoon. Then you need to kind of do kissy faces, so you're doing a bit of lip smacking, and hopefully what they'll do is mimic you. Babies, you probably know, are great at copying facial expressions, and that's how they're going to get their first taste. Okay. And then you carry on with that process. If they're happy, you can put the spoon a little bit further in, like inside the bottom lip. But then the key is to stop when you can tell that they've had enough. Slightly different with baby led weaning. So what you're going to do there is, again, sit directly opposite, have your really happy smiley face on and have your sing-song voice, and then you want a long stick shape vegetable, so longer than their fist, and you pop it on their high chair, and then you tell them what it is that they're having, and you can squish that veggie between your fingers, and if it does squash, you know it's soft enough and it's not going to be a choking risk, because it's squishable and it'll dissolve in their mouths. So if they go to explore it straight away with their hands, that's great. You just let them continue. With baby-led weaning, it doesn't often go up to their mouths immediately. They might play with it for a little while first, but eventually, if it does go up to their mouths, then that's fantastic. And it might not go up in the whole stick shape. They might have squidged it a little bit on their tray first, and they'll get some on their fingers, and that bit will go to their mouths. And this is all really positive. Now, what's key with baby-led weaning is that you have the same food in front of you on your plate as well, and show them how to do it. So if you've got like a steamed green bean or broccoli floret or something like that, and it's nice and soft, you want to be picking that up and putting it towards your mouth and eating it as well, so that they can watch you do it and copy. Okay, so say you've started and your baby starts to get a bit distressed, what should you do? So it's really important to observe your baby signs and try and prevent that from happening in the first place. And the signs to look out for are things like closing their mouths, turning their head away, being uninterested, and stop when you see that starting to happen. Even if they've hardly eaten anything, it's really important to stop. You want to keep this whole experience really, really positive. Continue talking to them in your really happy sing-song voice, maintain eye contact, and basically reassure them that everything is okay. You want to avoid lip tapping. So often I'll see parents where they'll have a spoonful of puree, and they're tapping the baby's lip with the spoon to try and get them to take a bit more, and that's a definite no. We don't want them to do that. And that's it. You just stop. And then the next time you go to feed them, the next day, or if you're on 2 meals a day at that point, the next time you go to eat them, just go back to the step that they were happy with before, and then progress from there. So some babies are really reluctant, and you can be doing this for a good few days. Other babies just go with it, and you'll be on 3 meals a day by the end of the first week. So they're so different and individual. And I guess if you're really worried, then you can still access, even though we're in lockdown, you can still access your health visitor to get some advice if you feel like progress is really slow and things are quite negative. That's fine. Okay, what if your baby grabs the spoon and paints the high chair with puree instead of eating? Well, actually, that's a really, really good sign. Let them have the spoon and grab another one for yourself. Let them have a spoon for each hand and grab a third one. And if they're keen to explore the food, then let them do that, even if it means that they're going to need a full strip down and bath afterwards. That's absolutely fine. And this is key because in that first couple of months actually of weaning, they are exploring the sensory characteristics of the food. So by that I mean is they want to know what it feels like, but not only on their hands and in their mouth, they want to know what it feels like in their hair. They are looking at the colours, they're smelling it, and they want to smell it up close and far away. There's a lot of sort of sensory processing that's going on there, and the bigger the sensory experience, the more their brains develop, and it's actually really, really good for them to get really deeply involved in the sensory experience. This is a common question. My baby is totally disinterested. Should I cut out their milk feed to make them feel hungry? So the answer to that one is no. At the early stages, eating isn't driven by hunger, it's driven by skill. Okay, so because eating is a skill that they have to learn because they're not born knowing how to eat, and it just takes them up until probably their second birthday, if I'm totally honest with you, to develop all of the skills that they need to eat and drink. It's really important that you're still allowing them to get all of their nutrients and their nutrition from milk, and then the food is kind of the add-on on top. So I know I talked earlier about there being critical nutrients that babies needed, and that's why weaning does have to happen, but it can be a gradual process. So we want to introduce those iron-rich foods, and then we're going to go on from there. So yeah, keep the milk going. It's really, really important. By 7 months, so once you've been weaning for at least 4 weeks, then we can start looking at moving things around. But in those first few weeks, just keep all the milk feeds as normal as you were doing before. Should you have wipes on hand? So no, definitely not. Wipes are actually really uncomfortable, particularly if you've got delicate skin and you're having your face cleaned. And babies often have really delicate skin. We sometimes see them even go red when they've had contact with food, and that's just the acid in the foods that's causing that sort of contact irritation. And so even using things like the water wipes or the unfragranced wipes can still be a little bit stingy. So I often say, don't use wipes. Wait until they've finished their meal and then take them over to the sink and let them splash in the water and clean themselves that way. If you wanted to, you could produce like a warm, wet face cloth or flannel at the end of the meal and let them have a play with that. And by doing that, they're starting to clean themselves a little bit anyway. And then, like I say, take them over to the sink, let them have the splash in some water, or if it's been a really sensory experience, take them into the bath. But wipes, I often find that wipes lead to what we call high chair aversion, where when babies really just don't want to eat, they don't want to come to the table, and it can go on into the toddler years as well, because they've just had such a negative experience, they've been wiped down all the time. The only exception is if their food ends up going in their eye or close to their eye, then yes, I would definitely use a wipe or something just to get that food away from their eye. You don't want the food going there, but that really is the only exception to getting involved with wiping them down during a meal. What about a drink? So we've talked a little bit about the different types of cups, but what's important is to introduce that cup with the meal. So what I usually say is once you've done those first few spoonfuls or playing with the puree or your finger foods, your steamed broccoli or whatever, then introduce a cup. It's like the next play activity in that little session that they're having, but show them what it does. So if you've got your baby cup or if you've got your spouted cup, put a little bit of water in, not too much. You don't want it to be so heavy that it's impossible for them to pick up, and tip it up yourself. So show them that if you tip it up, the water spills out. And again, mess, fine, no problem. This is what we want, and let them have a play with it. And if they go to grab it as well, then that's brilliant. You can take the cup up to their mouths and present it and tip it up a little bit into their mouth, so a little splash of water goes in. They'll get a shock the first time you do that because it's new, but that's fine. It's all about you having that big smiley face and that sing-song happy voice and making them feel reassured that this is all absolutely fine. And then when you do give them a little drink yourself like that, do that lip smacking thing again, that sort of kissing kind of thing, and that will help them just start to move the water around their mouths. And we know that babies can drink because they've had milk up until now, and water is slightly thinner but not that much, so it's not a hugely different skill for them to learn once it's in their mouths. It's the actual drinking from the cup that's the new skill, if you know what I mean. Okay, so that's day one done, or the first few meals anyway. What happens next? So you just continue. So if you're spoon feeding, you just continue, and this is where you might be loading up the spoon with a bit more food. So you've gone from just that little bit of puree on the end to actually spoonfuls, and your baby's more likely to have their mouth open, anticipating the food, and you can pop it in. It's quite important just to tilt the spoon down rather than dumping it in there, so that it's kind of just a gentle tilt. And then what we do find is that baby's lips will close over that spoon and they'll draw the food off themselves. If you're finger feeding, you'll probably find, if you're baby led weaning, it'll be much slower, but that's also fine because you're letting them go at their own pace. And as I said, the key with baby led weaning is eating with them so that they can see you doing it first. And it's a really great mealtime experience. Family meals, everyone sitting around the table having the same food at the same time. That's really what baby led is all about. And then you just progress on. So somewhere between that 6 and 7 month mark, you're going to go from your 1 meal a day up to 3 meals a day. And they might not be meals, that might be too strong a word. It might just be eating occasions. They don't have to fit in with the traditional breakfast, lunch and dinner. You've got months ahead of you where you can get that bit put in place. But by 7 months, you want all of the veggies and fruits and things out of the way. You want to have started to introduce excuse me, things like protein food. So that's your things like your meat, your fish, your dairy, eggs, beans and lentils, because they're your iron-rich foods as well. And so by the time you get to 7 months, 3 eating occasions a day is normal. So I think that is about it from me. Where can I find out more? Let me just come out of my screen share. So just to say really that if you do want to find out a bit more, my website is probably the best place to contact me. So that's childrensnutrition.co.uk. If you go to /welcome, that's where you can get this free download guide. You can contact me with questions. I'm also on, I actually have a private Facebook group, which you'd be very welcome to join. It's called the Children's Nutritionists Community. I'm also on Instagram as well as the Children's Nutritionist. So wherever you hang out, I'm around. And if you want to send me messages, send me questions, I'm very, very happy to help.
Okay, we've got some questions already, Sarah, if you want to just take these. I'm going to go from the top. Can it damage baby's stomach if you start to wean too soon?
Yeah, it can. So by too soon, we know that it's under 17 weeks. So that's the old sort of 4 month mark. What we found is when the weaning age changed from 4 months to 4 months to 6 months, babies started to be introduced to solids later, and that meant there was there was a drop in the risk of infections, so like gut infections, iron deficiency, anemia as well. And because although the weaning age previously was 4 months, people started at 3, and now the weaning age is 6 months, people start at 5. So it just shifting the whole thing back has reduced the number of infections and anemia that we're seeing. So we definitely say no solid food, nothing other than milk before 17 weeks.
Okay, another question. Let's just have a look. Okay, if you are doing baby-led weaning, would you offer them food after breastfeeding?
Yeah, so I think go back to that time of day when they would usually be playing, and that's when you want to do it. So I see in loads of groups people talking about milk first and then food, and I think that's slightly misleading, because you don't want to feed them and then immediately give them something to eat. You need to have a big enough gap so that they're interested, because if they're all full up from milk, often they're quite sleepy and dozy anyway, like we are after we've had a big lunch. It's not an ideal time. So the time to do it is after a feed, yeah, but not immediately after, and at a time when they're really alert and active and wanting to play.
Right, the next question. Okay, we've got twins that were born at 36 weeks. Anything different that needs to be done there?
Not because of the twins, but because of the prematurity, maybe. I think the best thing to do is if I can direct you to a blog that I wrote, which was actually published in a medical journal, so I'm quite proud of this one, all about weaning premature babies. So head over to my website, there's a blog bit. If you click on the blog bit and just type in premature, you'll come up with that blog. So it really depends on their development and where they are, and also if they've got any growth issues. Sometimes prem babies are smaller and need a high calorie, high protein diet for a bit of catch up growth. Yeah, slightly different, so head over to there.
Okay, brilliant. And what we'll do is we'll pop the link in the chat so that people can have a read of that afterwards. The next question about drinks, should the drink that's given alongside the food be called boiled water?
So under 6 months, yes. So by 6 months, I mean 26 weeks. But then after 26 weeks, you can just use normal tap water.
Okay. And Diana, oh no, that was Diana's question. Kelda asks, can you do a mixture of puree and baby-led weaning?
Absolutely. And actually that's what traditional weaning is, because we, in the past, people would start with purees and then start introducing finger foods, and that's exactly what that is. To be totally honest with you, as a healthcare professional, I quite like a mixture of both, because what we find is that babies learn all the skills, then they don't miss out on certain things. So yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. Last question that's come in from Angelique. Do you recommend baby rice or cereals at all?
Yes, so baby rice is great because often they're iron fortified, so it's another lovely way of getting iron into them. If you just mix them with baby milk, I can't really see a benefit, because you're not introducing a flavour or a taste or anything really. So the way I would use baby rice is as a thickener. So if you go to make a puree and it comes out too thin, sometimes they do, then you can thicken it up with a little bit of baby rice, and actually that can work out really nice because it's adding a few extra calories as well. So it's a really nice nutrient dense way of getting some nutrition into babies.
Okay, that's brilliant. One last question. Any tips for a baby with both reflux and eczema? Not sure if CMPA just yet, but potentially more of a risk of allergy wise.
Yeah, so I have first-hand experience of this. My daughter had both of those, and actually it turned out not to be CMPA, that's cow's milk protein allergy. It turned out to be an egg allergy, which we discovered through weaning. So So the advice is that you would still introduce foods as you normally would, but those high allergen foods, so things like dairy, soya, eggs, there's a whole list of allergen foods. You want to do them one by one, as in don't offer 2 new allergen foods on the same day. And early in the day, so you can observe for a reaction. So it could be an immediate reaction, which you'll see sort of within the first 20 minutes, half an hour, but it could also be delayed, and that's more common. We see quite a lot of delayed allergies, which could be the next day, and it could be things like worsening of eczema, worsening of reflux, diarrhea. Sometimes we see constipation, sometimes we see rashes, that sort of thing. So the advice is to do it as everybody else would do it, but to observe for the reactions. And of course, if you do have a reaction, get in touch with your GP as soon as possible. It can be quite handy to have some Piriton on hand, so that you've got something to give them if they do react, and that's safe. You can give Piriton to little ones. And you can just get that over the counter. You don't have to have a prescription for it or anything. And actually, just to reassure parents, because I work for the NHS as well, and I know that people are really worried about introducing allergens at the moment. But we know that if you delay the introduction of allergens, that your baby's more likely to have an allergy anyway. So it's important to get it in before their first birthday. And the reassuring part is actually that in terms of paediatric services in the NHS, we're relatively quiet. Now I'm looking for wood to touch, because it's a funny thing to say, but the adult services, are really, really busy. But in paediatrics, things are all right. We are busy. We are busy as we normally are, but we're not as busy as we thought things might be. So don't let that put you off.
Okay, that's brilliant. I think we've covered everything. I know that lots of you are going to have questions that enter your head as soon as the workshop ends. By all means, contact Sarah afterwards. It's always the way that you walk away and think, oh, I wish I'd asked that. So yeah, hook up with her or catch us on Weaning Week on social media. Don't forget that there is another workshop this afternoon that you can join in with, and also our online Twitter chat. So we've got Weaning Whilst Working with Adam Shaw this evening at 8 p.m. Let me just make sure that I've got the times correct on that. Yes, I have. And then we've got our Twitter chat that's also kicking off this afternoon on Twitter. Hook up with us on social media, pop over and visit the website and have a explore around and see what you can find. There's recipes on there, there's information on products, there's loads that you can do. And we will catch you all very soon, I'm sure. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining in. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Sarah.
Bye.